The Simpsons may be one of the most famous cartoons to ever hit the airwaves, but that doesn't mean it still didn't have its fair share of duds even in its golden years, such as the infamous The Principal and the Pauper. But if we're talking about divisive episodes of this show, one that must be mentioned is Homer's Enemy. Pitched on the concept of what would happen if an ordinary person were thrust into the world of The Simpsons, this is one episode that's had many a fan debating its merits ever since its release, to the point that some even say it's the episode that killed The Simpsons altogether. And today, I'd like to go over this episode and specifically explain all the different ways that it doesn't work. And obviously there will be spoilers for Homer's Enemy ahead, so in case you've never seen it and somehow don't know how it ends, you should probably turn off the video. Okay, so let me just preface this by saying that I'm not a long-time or mega fan of The Simpsons, which is important to note because pretty much the only thing everybody can agree on when it comes to Homer's Enemy is that it's only accessible to those who've been fans of the show for a long time. So this video will be looking at the episode from a much more objective standpoint, and specifically the way it was written as a piece of media meant to deconstruct itself. Because while I may not be a mega fan, I have seen The Simpsons and know enough about it to know what's wrong with this episode when coupled with my knowledge from my years of writing books. So with that being said, please forgive me if I make any slight errors, and if you'd rather explore this topic with somebody who has a deeper knowledge of The Simpsons overall, please feel free to click off the video. Alright. So with that out of the way, there are quite a few issues that plague the writing behind Homer's Enemy, and one of the biggest has got to be in the depiction of Frank Grimes himself. Because to put it simply, and as I already mentioned, Grimes is supposed to represent a real person thrust into the world of The Simpsons, and demonstrate how any normal man would completely snap with all the insanity around them. But the problem here is that the character of Grimes is anything but ordinary, because in order for him to have his breakdown, he has to come to envy Homer and see him as a menace to society, and in order for him to come to envy Homer, he's given a backstory that would make the likes of Doofenshmirtz proud with just how bad it is, which itself is a problem on two separate fronts. Because first of all, his backstory deprives him of his main purpose in the story, to represent an average person, because no ordinary person would ever have a backstory as bad as he does, so that already defeats the entire point of the episode, because his backstory is much more in line with that of some cartoon villain, and therefore doesn't represent how a normal person would behave in Springfield. And secondly, anybody who knows anything about The Simpsons knows that Homer's life is to be anything but envied. Sure, he's got a family, a home, a job, but his life is still a very dysfunctional one where happiness is cruelly pulled away from him more often than not. And that's the whole point of The Simpsons. In one corner you have the American dream, and in the other you have The Simpsons, which, while obviously exaggerated, represents what the average American family is really like. And that's a major reason why it was so popular, because most average American people could see themselves in the various characters, while also being able to take solace in the fact that they have it better than them. So once again, the whole point of a character like Homer is that you're supposed to be glad that you're not him. That's how most normal people see him. In fact, the original intent behind the character of Ned Flanders was even supposed to be something akin to the dynamic between Homer and Grimes, because Ned Flanders was supposed to represent the ideal behind the American dream, against The Simpsons being what it's actually like. He's nice to everyone, has a loving family, a nice job, even a good body, is religious, and things generally go his way. In other words, he's meant to be the anti-Homer. And since Homer represents the average American, Ned represents the American ideal that few can achieve. But while Homer clearly does envy him to an extent, more than anything else he just finds him annoying, which makes for a more compelling dynamic between the two than the one set up between him and Grimes, especially because here the shoe is placed on the other foot. Now, don't get me wrong here. The idea of somebody having it so bad that they come to envy Homer Simpson's life without realizing just how bad he has it could have made for a great story. I mean, it might not have been all that funny, but the dramatic irony and lessons that could be learned from that are just rife for possibilities. However, the issue lies in the fact that the episode tries to side with Grimes and make it out like Homer really does have it better than him. Which he does to an extent, don't get me wrong, but not anywhere near as much as Grimes clearly believes. Because once again, a major crux of the episode hinges on Grimes' belief that Homer is constantly rewarded for doing nothing but sitting on his butt all day, and that he doesn't deserve what he has because he's simply an idiot who had everything handed to him on a silver platter whether he earned it or not. But in actuality, Homer often ends up paying dearly for his stupidity, and his laziness doesn't get him anywhere in life. Sure, he can pay for his home and has a job he isn't qualified for, but as I noted before, the fact that most episodes depict him as suffering because of his laziness and poor choices easily balances anything good he does have. So as a result, the episode's attempts to sell Grimes as being in the right for envying Homer fall completely flat because nobody can really buy the fact that Homer Simpson is somebody anyone should be jealous of. And that's what leads into the other big issue with Homer's enemy, specifically that many don't find either Homer or Grimes to be sympathetic. Because on the one hand, Grimes comes across as an entitled jerk who believes the world owes him everything and repeatedly tries to ruin Homer's life out of spite, rather than a genuine attempt to help Springfield. While on the other, Homer comes across as too obliviously stupid and insensitive to root for either. And as I've noted in countless videos, one of which I'll leave a link in the description to in case you'd like to explore this topic further, that is one of the biggest mistakes a writer can make. As a man who's written books, I have always maintained that one of the most important parts to writing any story is that if a writer intends a character to either be sympathetic or unsympathetic, then they have to actually be presented that way by the narrative. And this episode manages to pull off a special kind of faux pas by having both main characters that are intended to be sympathetic come across as unsympathetic. And going along with that, the irony here is that it's actually easier to sympathize with Homer than it is with Grimes, despite the fact that the narrative wants the viewer to feel sorry for him, even as they laugh at his expense. Because while Homer may act really stupid, he still offers to make amends with Grimes several times, and is even the only one to show any concern for him when he finally snaps. Again, he might not be able to recognize his role in his breakdown and subsequent death, but at least there wasn't any malicious intent on his part, and he does put in an effort to try and make peace with the man. Now, that may not be enough for a lot of people, and that's fine, but at least it's something. But Grimes, on the other hand, can't stop complaining about how bad he's had it and makes it clear that he believes he's entitled to Homer's life because he feels he earned it and Homer didn't. As I noted before, his actions throughout the episode are motivated a lot more by self-pity and spite, which is made even worse by the fact that Homer isn't even actively trying to hurt or sabotage him in any way. And because of that, it can be very difficult to sympathize with him, since he ends up bringing everything on himself, and for selfish reasons on top of that. In the end, Homer's enemy is objectively a failed attempt by the writers to deconstruct their own show, because what started out as an attempt to show what would happen if a real person was to enter the world of The Simpsons instead becomes the story of a miserable man trying to destroy Homer's life because he envies him and can't stand his stupidity. So overall, it was a flawed concept for a show like this from the start. It's kind of like what happened when they tried to parody negative continuity in The Principal and the Pauper, as I got more into in another video, which you can also find a link in the description to. It didn't really work out. Because while deconstruction can be a very good thing when done right, as I detailed in another video which you can also find a link in the description to, it's something that has to be handled very carefully. And simply put, careful is one thing Homer's enemy most definitely is not. Because even if you want to disregard all the other writing issues I just went over, the fact still remains that the episode does feel like a pretty mean-spirited takedown of America's favorite family. And considering most watch the show simply to get a good laugh, it's easy to see why many fans find it so off-putting. Because, as I noted in the aforementioned video, the best way to deconstruct something that people hold in high regard is to do it very respectfully, so that even if they still don't agree with what you have to say, they'll concede that you do have a point in what you're saying. But because Homer's enemy handles its internal deconstruction with the same kind of blunt and sadistic humor as any other topic the show covers, it ends up coming across as too mean-spirited to really be funny, and can even leave many wondering what the heck they just watched. Now, don't get me wrong here. The idea of putting a character from the real world into the world of The Simpsons could have worked and was frankly rife for comedic potential, but they went about it all wrong. Because it doesn't work as a deconstruction of The Simpsons, it doesn't work as a regular episode of The Simpsons, and it doesn't even work as just a normal TV episode. By pretty much any geometric out there, it's not well written. Now, if you happen to be a fan of the episode, that's totally fine, as I know opinions on this topic can vary wildly, but I'm just trying to explain why so many have issues with it. Because it completely fails to do anything it sets out to, up to and including just being funny, and as a result might actually be the perfect example of why internal deconstruction is more often than not a very bad idea. Okay, I think I've gone on about this for long enough. So now I'd like to hear your opinions. Do you believe that Homer's Enemy is one of the worst episodes of The Simpsons for any of the reasons I just went over? Or do you believe it's an underrated piece of genius-level satire that most just can't see the brilliance of? Whatever the case, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And as I already noted, you do not have to agree with anything I said in this video just because you watched it. You can absolutely love Homer's Enemy and believe I was totally wrong about it, and if you do, that is completely okay. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate all of it, and I hope to see you all next time.